Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel on Venezuela, rebuilding power and rebuilding opportunities. We've got a really great set of panelists today. Sort of to build on that, and I want to give this question to Riva, is, how do you prevent this early energy-led job creation from reinforcing the corruption, the patronage, or the military capture of the energy value chain? So local content can be used to entrench vested interests in a country. The jobs, the contracts that are awarded can all be linked to sort of old regimes. So Riva, maybe you can give us a perspective on this, and then I'd bring in Oman and Sonia just to weigh in on any additional views around that. So Riva, sorry to put you on the spot, but
no, yeah. No, and I think Ileana has really valuable expertise here on how to shape local content requirements, right? So that they're smart local content requirements, right? And making sure that they're targeting different parts of the supply chain to make sure that that expertise is built up over time. But that is a process, right? But I think, just more in the more immediate steps. And again, when you look at this from like the US project in Venezuela, it's very much like this idea of, okay, how do you exert external force to get what the White House wants out of this project, so to speak? And the administration is very explicit. Okay, they want the oil. And how are they going about that? It's through this kind of like goose chase of shadow tankers, as we've seen, right? And it's supposed to be a display of the U.S. applying its military force to crack down and deprive the existing regime of illicit revenue, right, from oil that's otherwise going to China, or Russia, et cetera. And so if that is the case, then it's also, I think, a matter of how do you crack down on the shadow tanker fleet more immediately, right? Because you have to kind of connect the dots of, if you want to deprive that revenue generation, right, to the existing regime, and make this compliant and build toward the institutions and the rule of law and all of these different kinds of conditions that we need to come into place, then things like, how do you spread that risk, right? So denying insurance, right? To these illicit tankers. How do you crack down on, refiners who are processing, crude from, if a tanker has their transponder off for, a period of time, and they're like kind of in that gray zone classification of this is illicit trade, or, there are different avenues, right? And cracking down on like carrying out, basically flying under different flags for protection, and requiring, legitimacy certification, and different ways to go about that. But I think that's probably one of the early steps here, right? And at least coming from like how the U.S. is going about this. And then there's a question of whether, if you can then shift trade to compliant, oil trade, then how do you use that as a foundation, right, to build on from there?
Oman, is there anything else that we're missing? Because again, we're talking about energy-led job creation, and you speak a lot about the technical expertise and the diaspora, but how do you ensure that it is the average person on the ground that is going to be benefiting from this versus the elite capture, which we're quite familiar with in the country?
Well, that's a very interesting question. It's evident that Venezuela challenges are rooted not in a lack of resources, but in deficiencies related to skill and systems. The inefficiencies of the collapse of PDVSA is attributed to years of politicization, erosion of expertise, pervasive corruption, including delayed payments, inadequate maintenance, and decisions influenced more by political consideration than by technical and commercial rationality. Today, experts have different opinions about PDVSA futures. Some argue that it must be dismantled entirely, eliminated. Others believe it should be transformed into a modern, lean national oil company. Uh, from a technical standpoint, either scenario requires institutional redesign, as I was mentioned. However, if we only talk about the diaspora, we miss half of the picture. The other half is the specialized workforce that never left, and the young people coming out of Venezuelan universities right now and technical schools, workers who stayed in PDVSA and service company through the crisis, and a huge informal labor force that has been surviving in a very tough condition. Uh, in my opinion, this is the diaspora should avoid recreating centralized hierarchy and instead act as a mentors, reviewers, auditors, and advisors within modern frameworks like private operators, joint ventures, service ecosystem. Uh, Let me ask something important. I don't know. I think that the diaspora is only one part of the workforce equation. Closing the skill gaps require three groups working together, and I don't know if this I'm being a part of the actual question, but I think that the good professionals who remain in Venezuela, many of whom have operated under extremely difficult conditions and possess resilience and field knowledge that should not be underestimated. No? And secondly, the diaspora contributes by providing international perspective, promoting discipline, benchmarking practice, and preserving institutional knowledge. And of course, the next generation, all these young engineers and geoscientists who must be trained under modern operational standards. Uh, I'm not sure if it's the right answer to your question, but the diaspora should strengthen local professionals, not replace them. And international operators should partner with Venezuelan teams, not bypass them. And if the recovery depends only on returning diaspora talent, it will fail. And if it's ignored diaspora experience, it will move slower. And if it neglects the next generation, it will not be sustainable. So I think that it's all these things, the past provides expertise and the future must provide structure. I don't know, without recreate, when experience operate inside transparent, performance-driven system, you close all these skill gaps,
I have a comment on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we're putting the cart ahead of the horse here. As much of an advocate that I am for human capital and for people, the country has to stabilize in many fronts, not just the economic front or the fiduciary or the legal, but also on the frontiers of security, for example. If I look at Venezuela today, and I am a Colombian born individual that grew up through the narco traffic war in Colombia, I have lived there. I have seen it firsthand. And if you look at the southern border of Venezuela right now, has been populated by the ELN and the FARC. Those are the largest guerrilla fighters of Colombia. They're awful. They have sustained a systematic fight with the Colombian government for over 60 years. So it's not as easy as saying, I'm going to bring ExxonMobil and Chevron, but it's how do I protect their assets and the people that we are trying to bring into Venezuela to work, invest, and operate. And that's not going to be that simple.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to also think this whole perspective from the security side.
Yes. And I think that this is an interesting point, and I would be keen to hear your view, Ileana, on this, because in some ways I think we have asked Oman to discuss about the diaspora and the technical expertise there. He has then, Oman, also brought up the high the capable workforce that exists in the country. So the local content, the actual local content, Venezuelans who've gone to school in Venezuela and who have had this experience. And yet, when I hear you speak, I think you also mentioned that there's the overseas expertise that's needed. So you shouldn't necessarily only prioritize those. How do we, in our minds, balance the local content, the local job creation, with tapping into the expertise overseas? Could you just spend a couple minutes walking us through your thinking around that?
When I said about the diaspora, and it is because of the assumption that all the Venezuelans that left the country and had to find jobs or opportunities outside because of political reasons, security, safety, and that was actually my case too. If we're not able to return because of the security, if we don't have security, safety, I tell Venezuelans know what it means not to be in a safe place, not because, oh, they're going to steal your purse or something. We're talking about real being afraid of your safety and the one of your family. So, but I think back to your question. I think the solution is not really just give the priority just for Venezuelans. There might be people that are well capable and that might be used to working in remote and dangerous locations. People that have worked probably in Iraq and places that, I mean, going to Venezuela is just another dangerous country. I mean, even people that had worked in Africa, they are used to you know, harsh conditions in terms of safety, and they're used to. Not everybody is willing to you know, put them at risk. Even Venezuelans, I mean, some Venezuelans actually did a lot and sacrificed a lot to leave the country. So it's not an easy decision. Oh, let's go back. I'm going to go back. No. So that's what I think it will take a mixed balance of foreign people from other places that are willing to do that. The other thing is that a lot of the diaspora is people that are already in their 60s, 70s, or they're already retired. So these people, I mean, because of health or I mean, you're pretty much done in your career, in the sense that now you just want to enjoy all the effort that you put, and really it might not be able to go back, even to transfer knowledge, to train the people. So we cannot count with that, and that's, I would say it's a majority. I don't know what percentage, but I know it's a lot of people that I know that I mean, they done their part. So going back to Venezuela, it's going to be difficult. But there's people like mid-career that have a lot of experience, and they're not necessarily Venezuelan, that are willing and they're able and capable to go and support the country. So, but if the decision is, well, only Venezuelans are going to work in Venezuela, then that's a mistake.
Just a couple things just to mention, and I want to pivot a little bit to Riva, but on this point, just Sonia, how do the oil and gas revenues that are being generated now be used to actually deliberately fund skills, grid resilience, and diversification in the country? So again, building on the graduates from the local universities, how can we be sure that the money that's being generated from the oil revenues are being used to upskill that? And then I guess just to follow on with that, Riva, how do we ensure, again, I think it leads to the question of how do we ensure that it doesn't reinforce corruption? But what happens then? What's the next step on the geopolitical front, given the US's attention span is limited to a couple of weeks, it seems, in certain regions of the world before we shift on to others? So anyway, Sonia, let's start with you first, and then Riva, I just want to pivot a little bit onto the geopolitical lens and sort of what the future might hold for us.
Sure. Kathy, it's fascinating that you're asking me this question, because I've been following very, very closely the Venezuelan judiciary and the new assembly, or their assembly is new, but I'm sure under the influence of Marco Rubio. And yesterday, they came out with a new reform to the hydrocarbon laws of Venezuela. And it's called Ley Orgánica de Hidrocarburos, translating new hydrocarbon laws, organic law, hydrocarbons, and it opens up for production. It's totally, if you read the law in detail, and I encourage you all to look at it, it's brand new, it came out yesterday. Maria Corina Machado was part of the design, as well as Marco Rubio obviously is coming out of the General Assembly of Venezuela as a proclamation, as a new labor law, as a new reform to the hydrocarbons law. But that's where the enforcement, and that's the answer to your question right now. So I will encourage everybody to read more about it. But what it does, number one, ends up PDVSA's monopoly on oil and gas sales, oil and gas exploration and production. The corruption in Venezuela was such that they were the only authority in Venezuela to deal, to close operations, to to produce, explore, export, and export to whoever they wanted to without controls. That's what they were giving away their oil and gas to Cuba and Russia and China, while the people in Venezuela were starving to death. So the interesting part of this is Venezuela is now legally opening its oil sector to attract capital, foreign capital. And when Ileana talks about, it's not just Venezuelans, this is what we need, is foreign capital, foreign investors, foreign operators that will be attracted by the new law. And also by putting an end to PDVSA's corruption, the money is now going to be closely monitored in order to be distributed among the population. And the population obviously is the workforce, the workforce labor that will be ready to deliver and produce results for Venezuela in the oil production. So this will also allow private sector, meaning in the US or anywhere in the world, to enter Venezuela and produce independently without having to have exclusive partnership with PDVSA, without having to have those high markups in operation up to 50% for what they produce in the country, and without and also securing their property within the country. So to answer the second part of your question is, how do we put this into perspective? Now I can see, oh, by the way, Maria Corina Machado yesterday sold 500 million barrels of gas to the United States, Venezuelan oil, not just gas, Venezuelan oil. Keep in mind, we have the crudest oil in the world. So the oil that we produce in Venezuela is not easily processed by anybody. The United States has the best facilities to cure and produce this oil and convert it into something useful. But other than that, we just have pretty bad mud down there. So with that being said, now, and with this new regulation that came into place yesterday, with this new law, now we have opened the country for investment, not just at large scale, but also medium and small operators are now welcome into Venezuela. So what happens with the revenues? I'm sure that they're going to put a lot of new taxes maybe that will generate, is actually, they have reduced a significant amount of taxes from the existing operation. And so now Venezuelan producers, oil producers, and foreign oil producers will have more accessibility to cash because less money is being taken from them. But also the money that is going is being designed in a way that is going to be going more to the population and less to the politicians for the benefit of the country. How do we invest those funds is crucial. And keep in mind, corruption will take a long time to be cured in Venezuela. That has been there for decades. That's why we have, historically speaking, gone into serious dictatorships. This is not the first dictatorship that happens in Venezuela. So we keep on going in a vicious cycle, and everything boils down to levels of corruption that form and that tear the country from being a democracy. Okay. Obviously, with the influence of Cuba and Russia all the time in this region, that doesn't help us at all. But how do we put this capital to work towards the regular Venezuelan citizen? How do we enable these individuals to look into their number one producer of revenue for the country, which is oil and gas? Training, education programs. I would say even inviting foreign organizations and institutions of higher learning that have a specific skill set that will educate and retrain and reskill and upskill the individuals that have been left in Venezuela that maybe didn't have the opportunity to be educated. I will utilize a model very similar to what we use here in GET, where we have the 4 pillars of education, government investment, private investment, and the community, as well as entrepreneurships, and technology.
Yeah,
those pillars will sustain and rebuild the people in Venezuela, or the skill set of the people in Venezuela that is so needed right now.
So let me just switch, and just to pick up on that, because you mentioned the other countries that are involved, sort of the Russias, the Cubas involved. So Riva, I think I just want to get your perspective on this, is that, the Trump administration's regime cracking experiment, I think that's how you word it, is underway. And not just within Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and Nigeria, but also we see Greenland, very quickly replaced Venezuela in the news headline, for a couple of weeks. How do we make sure that Venezuela stays on the radar of the administration? And does it need to stay on the radar? So just a little bit about your views about the trade dimension, the regional, and the U.S.'s broader strategic goals around
the 4D chess, right? So experiment is I think exactly the word here, and this is very much on Rubio's mark, right? I mean, especially if he has presidential ambitions, which it sounds like he does for this upcoming term, then he has to make this work. So that's, I guess, a good thing, right? Is that he's invested, not just in making sure this Venezuela experiment works, and that he can show something for it, right? But let's see what happens in Cuba. And for the broader agenda of the region. So enforcement matters. So as Sonia brought up with the new hydrocarbon regulation, it's a really important signal, right, of how much the U.S. is going to get involved, right, in like drafting these new regulations and making sure everything sounds right. But implementation, enforcement, right, that's where this really comes into play. And so it's a complex construct of, like I said, you have to kind of cut off the illicit revenue, right, coming a lot from that shadow tanker fleet, and then they have like the military operations around that. And then you're saying, okay, the patronage networks that have been built up so far, right, with a smaller pie in Venezuela, as we've seen oil production fall, right, to around 1 million barrels at this point. Okay, then that pie is going to expand theoretically, right, as production increases. And maybe they're not going to go for like wholesale, dismantling of the regime. We know how messy that can be, but it is an experiment in regime cracking, right? To say, okay, one step at a time here. Let's get the new regulations in place. Those patronage networks remain, but it's going to be a bigger pie, right? And so then how do you ensure that those funds are going to, like, there's going to be oversight, they're going to go into the right places, they're not going into the pockets? And what are the enforcement mechanisms beyond like the actual like chasing tankers around, right? But also, notice Diosdado Cabello is not sitting in a prison cell somewhere right now, right? Padrino Lopez. So the threat of extradition, right? All the DEA indictments and all the cases, everything that's been built up over the years, that's hanging over the heads of the current regime members as well. And that's an important factor that I think is in kind of, Rubio's toolkit here. More broadly, if you look at, there's kind of like this dilemma that the administration faces, and strategic competition with China is everywhere. It's dominant, but China has the US in a vice with its control over critical inputs. And if you read the state strategy document, which Rubio penned, in large part, it's really revealing, of the intent here of how the U.S. is going to, reassert control over our hemisphere, this whole Monroe Doctrine 2.0 idea, stamp out foreign military power, organized crime, terrorists, all of this stuff, right? Where effectively they're looking at the map and they're saying, wait a second, why don't we have more like US influence here? Why is there Russian, Cuban influence here, Chinese influence here, across the region? How do we fix that? So the Obama days, it was about like, oh, let's build anti-corruption institution building. Remember CICIG and Guatemala, and which took down President Molina and all of that? Like that was the experiment back then. The tactics have shifted now of like, what are all the levers of force, right, to get behavioral change in an incremental process? And I think Rubio gets it of like, he wants this work to work in the Americas region more broadly. He wants to have more stable democratic states that are friendly to U.S. interests. It's an uphill battle in some cases, but then you just have a lot of different things competing for that vision. So I would look very closely at the Greer agenda. So U.S. Trade Representative Greer also understands for the U.S. to get the sort of reshoring goals it wants in place, moving more manufacturing away from China, Southeast Asia, for example, to the Americas region, more regionalized trade. I think we have to be thinking about beyond USMCA, how trade benefits will expand to across the region for those who are willing to play, by the US's rules, so to speak. That's going to be like the condition that this administration is going to try to impose. So how much political latitude will Greer have together to carry out that agenda? That's going to be the big test over these next couple of years in particular.
Fascinating. I mean, I guess it's a different type of local content you're describing, Riva, because it's not local as in Venezuela, but local could also be regional.
Regional, exactly.
It's still closer than China and Southeast Asia.
May I have a comment? Just 1 minute.
Of course, please.
Yeah, no, because I tried when I plan my intervention here. I tried to put aside politics and try to focus more on what is the diaspora and what is the meaning and what is BAPA can play a practical and important role to this. But I know with all these conversations, Sonia and Riva, and I think that it's really important to understand what is happening right now. Is Secretary Rubio 3 phases that is stabilization, recovery, and transition. How long it will take, and this is important to determine if the companies are going to be interested in Venezuela and how long they are going to be. It's not just the mandate of the president to say you have to invest $100 billion in Venezuela. What happened in the midterm? What happened is it's all the political situation changes. This government is going to be only 3 more years. In 3 more years, many things can happen, and after that. So it is important to, as a Venezuelan, it's probably I'm going to talk by myself, no as a BAPA president. I don't know if they're, but for myself, it's very difficult right now to understand if they keep the same regime in Venezuela, the same person that is illegally now vice president or president interim, how are they going to comply about the terms of the agreement that they're going to do with the government that probably in 3 years they're going to go for confiscation again? So nobody's going to enter Venezuela if the stabilization is not complete right now, and this is part of my comments right now. No, in terms of we need. I agree. If there is no stabilization, if there is not going to be transition, if there is not going to be a transition to democracy, nobody is going to enter in Venezuela. Nobody.
But I would love to hear the views of the panel in terms of what scenarios you see unfolding in the next 12 months or so, and so I'll combine the questions. So what kind of scenarios do you see unfolding in the next 12 months, and what indicator would you use as a benchmark to show that Venezuela is truly on a job-creating recovery path? So maybe I start with Ileana, if you can elaborate on that, and I see you have your hand raised anyway. So could you kind of address those two in about 2 minutes or less?
So yeah, thank you, Kathy. I think what I want to bring back is that as Venezuelans and everything looking from outsiders, because right now everybody is making opinions about Venezuelans and understanding and not understanding really the context. But I think we need to see what's happening in Venezuela right now as we are in a rehab process. So rehab has to come before regulation in different things. So when what needs to be rehab recover is really is the skills, workforce skills, and supplier capability. And so in that again, and I don't want to be misunderstood because I'm a local content expert. I'm not saying the local content is bad or local content is not important. I think what we need to understand is the timing and the role that it plays. I think we're in a period right now of healing, of rebuilding capability, not just on the people, but mostly on the institutions. And then the other thing is that Venezuelan energy sector is in recovery. So recovery, rehab, whatever you want to tell them. And when a system is in recovery, the priority is stabilization and safety and security, not regulation. So I think maybe that's my own opinion. They went too far with this hydrocarbon law, and they're gonna speed up a lot of process. But in the first year, Venezuela need everyone. It will need expats. It will need foreign operators. It will need people from everyone with different skill levels and different backgrounds. It will need foreign suppliers, and these suppliers will bring foreign people too. So it will need external standards and external know-how, especially to guarantee a safety start. And I'm not saying that the whole this is that it's a failure of the Venezuelan talent. I think it's a recognition of how much has been lost in terms of know-how or the brain drain that we have. An entire generation of graduates had limited exposure to foreign companies. So we had, I think, two generations or more of graduates, maybe engineers that don't have the experience that they could have had before. So same thing for local suppliers. So we need to kind of retrain, reskills, and we need to make sure that local suppliers regain the basic capabilities because they have been operating in an industry that was not in full mode, very low and with very low or limited safety standards. So then again. So in general, what I'm trying to say is that when it's to get it right, we need to focus on the rehab process, and local content at this point is not the main topic. Again, rehab before regulation. And it's like a car. In order to get it started, you need to put the cables in. Well, now we need to do other things. We need to focus on get the spark going and get the energy going, and that means bringing people with capabilities and suppliers with with the know-how, people with know-how to do that.
I mean, really good point. Just the basics. So if I hear you in the next 12 months, it's really to let the institutions of the country recover a little bit, not get too excited, but just sort of bring everybody back to basics to heal. And that is your 12-month indicator, as I understand. Yeah. Okay. Good. Riva, do you have any? I know you're a geo strategist.
I'll be super quick. And I completely see Ileana's point on that. The problem is just then what's the political timeline as well, right?
Exactly.
And this is the attention span issue is, the best case scenario is a lot of momentum is generated, right? So the Venezuelan government is cooperative, right? Enough. You start to see, that rehab taking place as you're describing, but I think in parallel to it, the rule of law signals are going to be really important and coming through in the regulation, the enforcement mechanisms, all of that. And to, draw in the investment and all of that just sort of like generates a lot of momentum, right, to move this forward. Worst case scenario is, you don't see that much change, right? And in fact, if the U.S. also tries to pursue, there's a lot of talk where Rubio is actually saying, yeah, oil, we get it. Although, as we know, this is, as Sonia said, this is like really, really heavy sour crude oil, right? That we're talking about, right? That for asphalt or road construction and things like that. This is not going to help the electric grid for AI power in the U.S., for example, right? So, if those expectations get tempered a bit, right, from the U.S. side of what they need from Venezuela in terms of the oil, And then they start going and looking at the Orinoco Belt, right, as Rubio's been talking about, for rare earths and gold and bauxite. And that is a hotbed for everything that Sonia was talking about on the Colombian guerrillas and Venezuelan military entrenched there, and prison gang network. Like, it is a mess. And so if you start to see like proxy conflict, right, in these areas where workers, especially foreign workers, are supposed to go, that's like the worst case. And that can get very ugly, especially if you have outside interests that want to make this more of a quagmire experiment for the United States. China also, if it's not getting oil, right, from US sanctions, then it can also punish energy majors with operations in China. And I know this is very front of mind for those companies today as well, where China can use its foreign sanctions law. So those are the two bookend scenarios that I would see there.
Fascinating. So one indicator then of what you want us to revisit in 12 months' time.
It's that slow build, like on the enforcement, I would say. And it's going to come down to enforcement. Are those funds going to the right places? Are we just feeding the patronage networks?
Yes. Great. Perfect. We'll come back to that in a year. Sonia, any last thoughts on that? And Oman, your one indicator as well. And then we will wrap up the session for today. So Sonia?
My one indicator is probably looking at the performance metrics of the new hydrocarbon law that was submitted yesterday. I think that is probably the biggest indicator right now, and the backbone of the roadmap on recovery for Venezuela, and it was laid down that way intentionally. So I think looking at performance metrics within the next 12 to 24 months on the performance of these new regulations and laws, I think that will be a great indicator. The other thing is that we need to remember something very important. It took us 26 years to get where we are in Venezuela. 26 years of corruption, 26 years of damage, 26 years of eradication of true operators in the region. And so it will take us a long time. And so the key word here is let's be patient. The United States is working as fast as they can in order to stabilize the country and promote recovery and transition. But it's not going to be an overnight operation. It will take time and a lot of hands on deck to make it happen. But it took us 26 years to get here.
Oman?
Yes, well, I agree with Sonia. I think that we, as a Venezuelan, we hope that this is going to be sooner than later, that we're going to get total freedom. I don't believe, and this is my personal opinion about the law. They are doing what the United States told them what to do with the law. So, but to be a little bit more positive, saying kind of, I think that if governance provide the foundation and the capital provides the fuel, the human talent provides the engine. Venezuela still has the resources. International and local industry may bring the capital, but sustainable recovery will depend on the strength, preparation, and organization of the professionals. And that is where the structure, diaspora, and engagement, probably through organizations like VAPA, can make a meaningful contribution. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation, and I love to be here and share with Riva, Sonia, and Kathy, and Ileana. This was a great time. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And I just wanted to echo thank you to all the panelists for all your heartfelt preparation. So this was a lot of work, super interesting. I think we could have talked for quite a longer time, but for those on listening to this webcast, it's not over. So this is the first of a series we hope to have on Venezuela. The situation is dynamic. And I think if we revisit it in a quarter or two, we're going to see a very different landscape, which will help us understand whether we're going to meet those 1 year sort of indicators that we've set out. So in the meantime, thank you again to each and every one of the panelists for all your time. I'm sorry that we couldn't answer all the questions from the audience, but stay tuned for next time, and we'll bring you another great set of speakers to discuss upcoming topics on Venezuela and Reconstruction.